Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 and our talks with Walt, as we are calling our readings through the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We now turn to Song of the Exposition, passages 6 and 7. We're going to take these two together. Now, there are many critics who really find passages 6, 7, 8, and 9 to be some of the weakest poetry in all of Leaves of Grass. I'm going to leave it up to you as readers to try to decide whether you agree or disagree. I fundamentally disagree. I think that if you've read every single word of Leaves of Grass to this point, a whole lot of what Whitman does in Song of Exposition 6, 7 here we're going to deal with in the next 8, 9, you're not going to be at all shocked. Now the assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net down the left-hand side, Talks with Walt, from the inscriptions all the way up through and including passages 4, 5 of Song of the Exposition. Now there is a tension, and it occurs, and we've talked about this a little bit already, but there is a tension that occurs in Leaves of Grass. Whitman wrote much of Leaves of Grass, 1855, to try to stop the inevitable war that was coming. So there's a tension for Whitman because he sat next to his brother in 62 and then for the next 2 years after 62 playing the role of a nurse during the American Civil War, and he saw the abject tragedy that was the American Civil War. I mean, he saw all the carnage, he saw the mutilation, will be his word, and he had to come to terms with the fact he had failed as a poet. And yet by 1871, when he's reading this poem, he is exuberant about the possibility that technology will somehow replace the horrors of war. Now, obviously, we laugh today at such an idea, and yet that was clearly his. We'll pay attention to it now as we go to work. Notice, we begin passage 6 again with these parenthetics, just like we started out with. This, and these, he will say, America shall be your pyramids and obelisks. That is to say, all this stuff that's being constructed around this exhibition. I told you guys, when Whitman uses the word America, for a volume that is as large as Leaves of Grass, it's bizarre, it's surprising that the word America or American only gets used less than 100 times. And I hear America Singing is where we started with this observation in the inscriptions passage. First use of America in Leaves of Grass is to foreign lands. And notice he'll say, like Egypt has its pyramids and obelisks, there is this ability to say America is going to be remembered for its technology. Your Alexandrian pharaohs, you'll remember this is the lighthouse, of course, near Alexandria, Egypt, one of the 7 wonders of the world, along with the gardens of Babylon. Your temple at Olympia in, of course, ancient Greece, that famous colossal statue of Zeus by Phidias. And then the parenthetic ends. In other words, what's he saying at the beginning of passage 6? Well, he's arguing that in the same way that Egypt and Greece have their great monuments, America will also have its great monument, only it will be a dynamic monument. That is to say, it won't be some rock pile, thinking here, of course, of the pyramids of Greece or an obelisk, but will rather be Americans building things. And again, this is that celebration of the labor that Whitman is so famous for. Then there's a break, and then notice a little short 4-line stanza here. The male and female, many laboring not, shall ever here confront the laboring many. This will be foundational to Whitman's understanding of what America is. America is workers. America is laborers. With precious, you'll remember this word from Song of the Open Road, passage 15. With precious benefits to both, glory to all. This is, of course, glory is an important word for reasons that we'll get into, because he's juxtaposing what America is as it's rooted, of course, in that tradition of the Iliad and the Odyssey. By the way, the first use of glory, you'll remember, is Cervantes from our study of the inscriptions. To the America, he uses the word the second time, and the eternal muse. So it's almost like a little chorus in the middle. And here shall ye inhabit powerful matrons. You'll remember this word from Song of Myself, passage 15. It's the only other use of the word matrons, with an exclamation point, we might add. In your vast state, this word vast obviously is central to his understanding of America. It's so large. Vaster than all the old. Again, notice how he uses the word old again and again throughout this poem. Echoed, of course, we've pointed out the value of that word for us, and I think our study of Bert Norton is important. My words echo thus in your mind. Echoed through long, long centuries to come. And again, for Whitman, everything was always about the future, the centuries to come. the sound of different prouder songs with stronger themes. Obviously, he's talking about, especially Virgil's Aeneid here. Practical, we're going to get to this themes thing here in a second with passage 7. Practical, we've commented on this, the pragmatism of Whitman. And then notice the use of the word peace now gets used 3 times. Peaceful life, the people's life. The people is capitalized, do you see it? Themselves. Lifted, illumined, bathed in peace. The first use of the word peace in Leaves of Grass is Song of Myself, passage 5, the peace and knowledge that pass all the argument of the earth. Of course, for Whitman, he is a great pacifist, obviously. And then you got the hyphen, which makes us think of Emily Dickinson's work. Elet, that is to say happy, right? Secure in peace. So for Whitman, coming out of the Civil War in 1871, by 1871, he's going to argue that peace is what will supplant because of technology. Let's listen now to Norton's for just a second at the beginning, opening lines of passage 7, which is kind of famous, away with themes of war, away with war itself. The cross-reference here is a poem we're going to get to later, As I Pondered in Silence, where the war of bloodshed is supplanted, now I'm reading Norton's, the war of bloodshed is supplanted by the war of ideas. Here the poet suggests that technology will conquer war. Now, of course, today we kind of roll our eyes because we went through the First World War and learned that no, technologies are what make war so much more horrific. And of course, at the conclusion of the 20th century, now into the 21st century, we continue to kind of recognize that tension and the way in which technologies in war dance. We'll ask this question at the end. Notice the use of the word away 4 times. Away with themes of war, obviously, he's basically saying, I'm done with the Iliad and the Aeneid especially. Away with war itself, the hope that we will never again have the kind of horrible war, civil war, that Whitman had to observe and endure. Hence from my shuddering sight, and this is going to get us ready for some of our reading of Drum Taps, some of the horrors that he saw. Away from my shuddering sight, to never more return that show of blackened, mutilated corpses, exclamation point. It's a pretty provocative image. The hell unpent and raid of blood. We cannot read a line like that without thinking of Ardante, especially Inferno, right, from Divine Comedy. Fit for wild tigers or for locked-tongued wolves, not reasoning men. Now, there was a real debate, of course, during Whitman's time, as it's ensued, that what are humans? And in the end, are humans basically like wolves and tigers? And here he says, no, war turns us into animals and not reasoning human beings. And in its stead, that is to say, we're getting rid of war, speed industries campaigns with thine undaunted armies, engineering, thy penance, labor, loosen to the breeze thy bugles sounding loud and clear. Are you ready for this? He's going to argue that STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, will save America. It's an amazing idea that, no, when human beings learn how to construct new technologies, we will never go to war again. So, of course, the optimism that we have commented on it elsewhere in other lectures, especially when we talk about Thomas Hardy, who kind of witnessed this optimism as the 20th century was about to begin. And, he wrote Darkling Thrush, and we've given a full lecture on that one at learnstrong.net that you can run down. He says, he says, away, we're back to the word away with old romance. Now, I want to share with you what Norton's has to say about this romance thing. Whitman persistently anti-romantic, both in poetry and prose criticism. Whitman associated his idea of romanticism with intrigues, amours, and the extravagant dissipation of an effete civilization. In other words, for Whitman, romanticism is weakness, especially because it is, away with novels, plots and plays of foreign courts, away with love verses sugared in rhyme. I mean, you can get the sense of this. By the way, go back to what we said about Song of the Open Road, passage 13. We have a very similar kind of observation. The weak elites that sit and spend all of their time. Do you remember that the way in which he said that in Song of the Open Road? Do you remember this? He says, out of the dark confinement, out from behind the screen, it's useless to protest. I know all and expose it. Behold, through you as bad as the rest, through the laughter, dancing, dining, supping of people, inside of dresses and ornaments, inside of those washed and trimmed faces, behold a secret, silent loathing and despair. Not for normal average Americans who go to work every day, but for those individuals. And here he's going to play that game. The unhealthy pleasures, extravagant dissipations of the few with perfumes, heat and wine, beneath the dazzling chandeliers. So you can kind of get a sense of what he's talking about. And now we're going to get 10 of these twos. To you, ye reverent sane sisters, that is to say the nine muses, I raise a voice for far superber themes of poets and for art. In other words, I'm no longer interested in the Iliad and the Odyssey, especially the Aeneid. I'm not interested in themes of war anymore. What is it that he's interested in? To exalt the present and the real. Watch how he uses the word real, by the way. In other words, America is real. Much of what's happening in the history of Europe, not real. Okay? And obviously we think about our Plato's Republic, Book 7. We've talked about it in the Cave Allegory and other lectures. To teach, I told you Whitman is teacher, right? To teach the average man the glory, remember we were there in passage 6 of glory, of his daily walk and trade. You'll maybe remember this from Song of Myself, passage 48. And there's no trade or employment, but the young man following may become a hero. We're playing that same game right here again. To sing in songs how exercise and chemical life, run down, for example, just somebody like Kellogg, and the way in which Kellogg was thoroughly convinced that diet and exercise could save America, are never to be baffled. To manual work, as opposed to extravagant dissipations of the few, right? Manual work for each and all, to plow, hoe, dig, to plant, and tend the tree. This takes us all the way back, of course, to Jefferson and the Jeffersonian idea that when we all live on the land and we build and we work the garden, as Voltaire will say at the conclusion of Candide, we all must cultivate our own garden, we're all going to be better off. The berry, vegetables, flowers, obviously Thoreau would have a lot to say about this in Walden. For every man to see to it that he really, again back to the word real, do something for every woman too. That is to say, Americans are real people, real humans. Why? Because we build things, we invent things, we create things. Notice how he'll celebrate this. To use the hammer and the saw, and then of course because he's a carpenter, he's going to make sure that he represents rip and crosscut in parentheses. To cultivate, that's a key word in our study here. To cultivate a turn for carpeting, carpentering, plastering, painting, to work as a tailor, tailorist, nurse, holster, porter. Again, all 5 of these. He's celebrating the kind of manual labor that will build America. And then he says it, to invent a little, something ingenious, to aid the washing, cooking, cleaning, and hold it no disgrace to take a hand at them themselves. For Whitman, this is the fundamental break with Europe. In Europe, you have servants that do all the manual labor. In America, everybody does the labor, including, and think of it, the power of it, including even our President Lincoln, who was well known as a physical laborer early in his youth when he was splitting logs and the like. Right? That is what makes America, America. I say, to finish now, I bring the muse today and here, of course we're giving this presentation in front of the exposition, right? All occupations, we're going to get to Song of Occupations later. Duties, broad and closed, toil, healthy toil, and sweat. You'll remember the first use of the word sweat is in Song of Myself, passage 4, right? I sweat through fog, right? Sweat, endless, without cessation. The old, notice how he stacks that word old, just like in passage number 1. So old, right? That is to say, everything is old of Europe. The old practical burdens, you'll remember the delicious burdens of the opening lines of Song of the Open Road. Practical burdens, interests, joys, and now what are these joys for Americans? Well, it's not about making money. Look at it. The family, parentage, childhood, husband and wife, the house comforts, the house itself, all its belongings, food and its preservation, chemistry applied to it, whatever forms the average, strong, complete, sweet-blooded, we're going to see this in a poem called So Long at the end of Leaves of Grass, sweet-blooded man or woman, the perfect longive, that is long-lasting, personality, and we've said the power of that word for Whitman, and helps its present life to health and happiness and shapes its soul for the eternal, real life to come. Told you this use of the word real. By the way, real life to come has to make us think about Plato's Phaedo and Socrates about to drink his hemlock shake right before he goes bye-bye, talking about the power of the soul and what's to happen in the afterlife. With later connections, that's a key word in this poem, connections, works the intertransportation of the world. Now he's going to celebrate some of the more amazing things that are happening in the world, and I'll just share with you what we have with from Norton's here. We've got some referencing that will happen to Mont Cenis and the like. And these are all tunnels, okay, that we're going to be talking about. There's a tunnel that will be joining France and Italy through the Alpine Mount Cenis. That's an 8-mile tunnel. There's a 9.25 mile tunnel beneath St. Gothard Pass between Switzerland and Italy, and then there's the 4.5 mile tunnel in Massachusetts on the Fitchburg Railroad. And so all these are going to be referenced, as well as the Brooklyn Bridge. So let's look at it. With latest connections, works the intertransportation of the world. We're going to get to this with Passage to India, by the way, written in the same year. Steam power, the great express lines, gas, petroleum, these triumphs of our time, the Atlantic's delicate cable, the Pacific Railroad, the Suez Canal, the Mount Cenis and Goddard and Hoosick tunnels, the Brooklyn Bridge. Think about that the power of the Brooklyn Bridge. It'll be finished in 1883. He's giving this presentation in 71. The bridge begins in 69. So for Whitman, the Brooklyn Bridge will be one of those great symbols of American industry. This earth, all spanned with iron rails, with lines of steamships threading in every sea. Our own rondure, the current globe I bring. This word rondure will come up in Out of the Rolling Ocean, the Crowd, a poem we've already seen, and then Passage to India, passages 4 and 5, we're going to see it for the last time used. In other words, everything about all that's happened in the history of the world for Whitman brings us to the great notion of industry in America. And the way that Whitman, now to finish, the way that Whitman would define the American Civil War was that it was a necessary evil that brought Americans to a realization that industry and technology, STEM is what we call it today, would be able to save not only America but the rest of the world, and we would never have the kind of horrific wars that we saw in the American Civil War, and the killing and the genocide and the killing and the butchery. And of course, the irony of all ironies is just a few years later, in 1914, we will have the most horrific of contests globally. Well, let's finish it to as we already said, his argument is that industry is somehow going to trump war and technology, and that America's gift to the world is its innovation, its ability to make things, and that in fact schools should be all about helping students, you guys, learn how to make stuff, which is an interesting idea. At 2B, of course, the repetitive anaphoria of 10 of those twos. Twos are away, away, away. At 3A, I mentioned Passage to India. In the same year, 1871, he's going to write that classic poem that we'll get to later. I mentioned Voltaire's Candide. We all must learn to cultivate our own gardens. Think, obviously, about the cultivating invitation that is Thoreau's Walden. We've given full lectures at learnstrong.net over all of the chapters of Walden. I'm going to mention as well here, because we're dealing with it, Crane's Red Badge of Courage of 1895. I mean, think about that one. That story, more than any single novella, is going to call into question the very thing that Whitman is saying here about, let's just forget about this whole notion of the theme of war. We can read the Iliad, we can read the Aeneid, but we do not have to celebrate, All Quiet on the Western Front, of course, comes to mind. We don't have to celebrate the idea that young, especially men, but obviously men and women, can go off to die in war, and obviously technologies play a horrific role in all of that. And finally, at 3B, how do you own a poem like this, or a couple of sets of lines? Do you agree, for example, I'll ask you a couple of questions to think about. Do you agree that technology can keep us from war, or only makes war more inevitable? There obviously is the question with the nuclear phenomenon that will happen in the 20th century, and we have to think about a text like Lord of Flies, don't we? Another question. Is America, in your estimation, still the place or the country where we teach or we challenge students to invent new things, to problem solve, in other words? Do you feel like that is the case for us in our schooling? And if not, why not? Have we invented enough, or is there more inventions necessary? Let's come back to passages 8, 9 to finish. Thank you.